Hi there, it's me again, Rob Vlock, author of the Sven Carter series of middle grade novels. I'm speaking to you from my writing studio today, which I lovingly refer to as the shoebox, to share what I've learned over the years as an author. I've developed this series of videos to help kids in classrooms everywhere understand the craft of writing, to help them learn to love storytelling, and to become better writers. So whatever you do, be sure to stay tuned until the end of this video for a hands-on exercise you can use to get a better grasp of the topic we're talking about today. What is that topic? I am so glad you asked. Today we are going to take a look at perspective. Wait, hold on. That doesn't quite look right. Does that look right to you? No, I didn't think so. Hold on. Let's try that again. Today we're going to be looking at perspective. You see, now that's better. In my last video, we talked about point of view. And if you haven't checked that episode out yet, you can find it right here if I can manage to put a link to that video here. If not, you'll find it in the description. The funny thing about perspective is that a lot of people tend to confuse it with point of view, and that is totally understandable because the two terms are often used interchangeably in everyday speech. But when you're a writer and you're talking about writing, point of view and perspective are really quite different from one another. So what is perspective and how does it compare to point of view? Keep watching and you'll get some answers. If you remember from my last video, point of view is really about who is telling your story. It basically comes down to whether you're using a first or a third person narrator. First person or third person. I skipped over second person in that video because it's not often used in fiction writing. Usually we focus on first and third person. So here you can see point of view equals who. Perspective, on the other hand, involves how that narrator that you're using interprets and tells the story. And you can see here, perspective equals how. So let me show you what I mean by that. Pretend we have an event. Let's say it's a car accident, a really dramatic car accident like this one. Now imagine there are two witnesses to that car accident. Witness A and Witness B. Pretty creative names, I know, but I'm a creative guy. So let's imagine Witness A is hearing impaired and she can't hear anything that happened in that crash, but she witnesses it. And when she describes it in something that you're writing, she would describe it in terms of what she can see because she can't hear. So she might say something like, I stared in frozen horror, watching a million diamonds rain onto the pavement as fragments of shattered windshield glinted in the sun. Now, let's say Witness B is there as well, and Witness B is visually impaired, so he can't see anything that happened in the crash. That means he can only describe what happened in terms of what he can hear. So he might end up saying something like, I jumped as the scream of crumpling metal assaulted my ears. So here you have two different people witnessing the exact same event. And in both examples, they're first-person narrators. It's the same point of view in terms of the type of narration we're using. But how those first-person narrators talk about that event is totally different based on the way they experience the world, which means the way they relate it to the reader is necessarily going to be different because those characters see the world in a very different way. Now, keep in mind, it doesn't just have to involve senses like hearing and sight. There are a ton of reasons characters or narrators might have a different perspective on what's going on in a story. Here's a great example of that from the second Sven Carter book, Sven Carter and the Android Army, which looks a little bit like this. And in this scene, Sven, Alicia, Will, and Junkman Sam are riding in Sam's motorhome, and Sven decides to turn on the radio, and he is not happy about what he hears when he does that, because the biggest pop star in the history of the world is singing. His name is Dixon Watts, and everyone on Earth loves him. Well, I should say every human on Earth loves him, but Sven, because he isn't human, he's an android, he hears Dixon's music completely differently than most people. So you can hear how he reacts to what he hears Dixon singing right here in this example. Ugh, Dixon Watts was singing. As usual, it sounded like a cat had gotten its tail caught in the door. How could anybody listen to this? He sounds like a blender full of quarters. The whine of his voice bored into my skull like a rusty drill bit. So that's Sven's description of Dixon's singing, and I want you to keep that in mind because we are about to jump into today's writing exercise, which I've come up with to show how changing the perspective can really, really change how your story is told. So get your pencils ready because here's today's exercise. Take an event described in the first person by one character and rewrite it from the perspective of a different character. Let me show you what I mean and give you an example of that exercise. You just heard me read an account of Dixon Watts singing told from Sven's perspective, from an android's perspective. Here's what that same thing might sound like from Alicia's perspective. And Alicia is human, so she's going to hear things differently and she's going to tell the story differently. So listen to this. This is Alicia. Ooh, Dixon Watts. I love this song. The dreamy, pitch-perfect tones of Dixon's voice wound their way into my head and wrapped their silken threads around my brain like a warm, comfortable blanket. A second ago, I was worried about... What was I worried about? How could I worry about anything at all when there was music this beautiful in the world? So that's Alicia's reaction to Dixon Watts singing. Now, see how changing the perspective from Sven to Alicia changes in a really dramatic way how the story is told. From Sven's perspective, it sounds a little like this. The whine of his voice bored into my skull like a rusty drill bit. But from Alicia's perspective, the dreamy, pitch-perfect tones of Dixon's voice wound their way into my head and wrapped their silken threads around my brain like a warm, comfortable blanket. Wow, right? I mean, it's the exact same event, but it's told by two different characters who give us radically different stories. And that would have a tremendously significant impact on how a story would unfold if you have two very different characters like that telling it, which is a perfect example of exactly how perspective works. So, what's the big idea about perspective? It's basically just this: how one person tells a story is often very different from how someone else might tell a story, which is different from yet how another person like me might tell the story. Well, that's about it for today's video. I'm Rob Vlock with my luxurious hair and super cool mustache. I hope you've enjoyed talking about perspective. I know I have. I'll see you again soon, but in the meantime, keep writing, keep reading, and make sure you always keep it fun. Bye-bye.